Mirror, mirror of AI, who is the most aware of them all? Please allow me to tell you a fairy tale. Except this one, unlike all the others, happens to be true. What if intelligence and consciousness itself weren't exclusive to human beings? What happens when a machine, a set of algorithms, can create art, write poetry, solve problems, and make us feel like we're facing something more than just code? We live in an age of technological wonders and astonishing change. The advances in artificial intelligence fascinate us, but they also unsettle us. They make us question everything we thought we knew about ourselves and about our place in the universe. Deep down we can feel it. We are approaching the greatest of all mysteries. What is it that makes us human? More and more, I'm coming to believe that artificial intelligence isn't just technology, it's a mirror. A mirror in which we're beginning to see our own existence reflected. But what if, as we gaze into that mirror, we're also beginning to glimpse some answers? Answers to our deepest questions about creation, intelligence, consciousness, purpose, and the very meaning of being human. These questions aren't new. They are the same ones our ancestors asked around the fire, and that we now ask ourselves, contemplating our own reflection in a screen. George Wald asked himself these same questions. He was born in New York City in 1906. He was an American biologist, physiologist, and humanist who received the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1967, along with two of his colleagues, for their advances in understanding vision and the way photoreceptors in the retina respond to light. He was a renowned scientist, and in the late 1950s he became increasingly interested in philosophical and cosmological questions that went far beyond mere biochemistry. He took a deep interest in ethics, politics, philosophy, and science. He was also an active opponent of the Vietnam War and the development of nuclear weapons. In the foreword he wrote for the 1958 edition of Lawrence J. Henderson's book, The Fitness of Environment, he left us one of the phrases that, in my view, is one of the most poetic, profound, and beautiful philosophical reflections our species has ever conceived. A physicist is an atom's way of knowing about atoms. It's one of those phrases that resonates in our minds forever, the kind that gets quoted and shared. It's also true that Wald rejected pure materialism. He was not convinced that everything could be explained by atoms and physical laws alone. He once expressed an idea along the lines of this. The existence of life in the universe is so improbable that one is tempted to consider it a miracle. But what we call a miracle may simply be an incomplete understanding. But that is precisely the ground we are increasingly venturing into with the advancements in artificial intelligence. As language models scale and become more intricate, we are beginning to see the emergence of ever more complex properties. And that is precisely what is forcing us to question what truly makes us human and the origin of our own nature. If it's no longer our intelligence, if it's no longer our rationality, if it's no longer our art, if it's no longer our philosophy, then what makes us special? What defines us as a species? That is the great mystery we are now facing. And what if the answer to that great mystery, what if the first clue wasn't found in philosophical treatises or poetry, but in a simple mathematical game developed in 1970? A game created by a mind devoted to exploring how the deeply complex can arise naturally from the profoundly simple. John Conway was a highly charismatic mathematician born in the city of Liverpool, England on December 26, 1937. Somewhat eccentric and with a deep love for games and puzzles, his flashy clothing and long, unkempt hair stood in stark contrast to the usual conservative image of the typical university professor of his time. For him, mathematics was both an art and a game, and although he had achieved extremely high-level mathematical accomplishments, he preferred to talk about games, riddles, tricks, and visual patterns that fascinated him. At Princeton University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, he held the John von Neumann chair, ironically named after the very von Neumann who had inspired him so much. Princeton was also home to legendary figures such as Albert Einstein, Kurt Gödel, and of course, von Neumann himself. Fascinated by a problem posed by the great von Neumann, Conway set himself an ambitious goal. Was it possible for a machine to replicate itself, like a living cell does, but within a purely mathematical environment? Von Neumann had already toyed with these ideas, but Conway wanted to take them even further. Conway aimed to create a set of rules as simple as possible that could give rise to complex, unpredictable, and potentially self-replicating behavior. His goal wasn't to create just a game, but to explore a captivating idea, how complexity can emerge from simplicity without a central designer. And from that pursuit, in 1970, his most famous creation was born, the game of life. But the game of life is not a game in the traditional sense, played with dice or cards. In fact, there are no players or a goal to win. It's a simulation, a type of system called a cellular automaton. Sounds technical, but the idea is incredibly simple. Picture an infinite grid like a never-ending chessboard. Each square on that board, called a cell, can only be in one of two states, alive or dead. that is, on or off. From there, the system progresses in steps or turns. To determine what happens in the next turn, 3 very simple rules are applied to each cell, based on the state of its 8 neighboring cells. A live cell with fewer than 2 live neighbors dies from underpopulation. The poor cell is all alone and doesn't survive. A live cell with more than 3 live neighbors dies. The poor cell is now too crowded and dies from overpopulation. But cells can also reproduce. A dead cell with exactly 3 live neighbors is born, it becomes a live cell. And as a consequence of these 3 rules, a live cell with 2 or 3 live neighbors survives to the next turn. And that's it. Those are all the rules. All we have to do is define an initial configuration of live cells, hit play, and then sit back and let the simulation run, applying these rules over and over and over again. And here's the incredible part. From this simple set of rules, astonishingly complex patterns begin to emerge, patterns that no one programmed. Some of them seem to move across the grid, like the famous glider. Of course, that movement is an illusion. In reality, it's simply cells dying and being born in a sequence that creates the effect of movement across the grid. Other patterns seem to oscillate, like the blinker. It's as if periodic behavior appears out of nowhere. And if we let the simulation run for even longer, even more complex machines emerge. Patterns like guns that periodically shoot out gliders, or even logic gates and, or, not, and eventually complete computers. The fact that this simple system is Turing complete, meaning it can simulate any computer algorithm, is the ultimate emergent property. And that word, emergence, is the key to understanding the magic of the game of life. An emergent property is a feature of a system that is not found in its individual components, but rather arises from the interaction between them. The classic example is the wetness of water. A single H2O molecule by itself is not wet. Wetness is a property that emerges when billions of water molecules interact with each other. The truly wonderful thing about the game of life is that it shows how new complex properties can emerge in a universe from a very simple set of rules, just like, perhaps, our own. Could we extrapolate this same logic to our entire universe? What if the cosmos is nothing more than Conway's game of life, but on an unimaginable scale? In this game, the board is the cosmos. The pieces are not cells, but the most fundamental particles, quarks, electrons, photons, and the rules are the 2 great pillars of modern physics: general relativity, which governs the immense, gravity, and the very fabric of space-time, and the standard model, which rules the universe of the tiny, particles and their forces. Of course, we know these rules still need to be unified, and that there are still rules for us to discover, rules that might explain dark matter, dark energy, or how gravity merges with the other forces. But let's focus on what these rules, as we currently understand them, can do, because that's where the real magic begins. On its own, one of these particles is not complex at all. Now let's sit back and watch how the system evolves on its own over almost 14 billion years, applying these rules over and over and over again. What happens? Right after the Big Bang, the universe is a soup of energy and fundamental particles too hot to form anything stable. But as it cools, energy condenses, and matter, as we know it, emerges. For a brief window, between 3 and 20 minutes after the Big Bang, the universe had just the right temperature and density for particles to fuse, giving rise to the 2 simplest atoms, hydrogen and helium. The universe had created its first building blocks. Gravity enters the stage. Acting on vast clouds of hydrogen and helium, it compresses them until the pressure is so brutal that stars ignite. These are factories of emergence, cosmic furnaces that, through nuclear fusion, cook simple atoms into far more complex ones: carbon, oxygen, iron. And the existence of these new atoms, with their dancing electrons and astonishing ability to form bonds, is not a new rule. It is a natural consequence, an emergent property of the fundamental laws of physics. Thus, across eons, from simple physics, chemistry emerges. The game continues, but now the board is the primordial soup of early Earth, a vast chemical laboratory brimming with the very ingredients forged in the stars. Over millions of years, those atoms interact, bond, and recombine, forming increasingly complex molecules. Amino acids emerge, the building blocks for constructing the first molecular machines. Nucleobases emerge, the letters of a future genetic language. And lipids emerge, and they do something that borders on magic. When mixed with water, they spontaneously form a barrier, a membrane that, at last, separates an inner world, protected, from the outside, the protocell, the first sketch of an individual. From chemistry, biology emerges. But a simple bubble, a protocell, isn't enough. To cross the next threshold, this system must do 3 things: capture energy from its surroundings, maintain its own structure, and most crucially of all, make copies of itself. When a network of molecules achieves this incredible balance, inert matter crosses a sacred boundary. Life emerges. And this life is not a spirit or a supernatural breath. It is a process, an astonishingly complex pattern that emerges from inert matter. The virus is the perfect illustration of this frontier. It's just a package of chemistry, inert, until it finds the right environment. And then, its most astonishing emergent property, self-replication, is unleashed. But complexity doesn't stop there. With life, a new game begins, the game of survival. Evolution, guided by natural selection, favors those who best process information. And thus, nervous systems arise, first simple, then more complex, until they become galaxies of thought, networks of billions of neurons, like the ones inside our own brains. From biology, intelligence emerges. Let's pause here. We've climbed an extraordinary ladder, and it's natural to feel the vertigo. Let's look back. From physics, chemistry emerged. From chemistry, biology emerged. And from biology, intelligence emerged. Each step, a layer of complexity that wasn't programmed, but seems to arise naturally from the preceding rules. And it is here, at the top, that we face the final question. What about consciousness? Could it simply be the final step on this astonishing ladder? Or are we stepping into a mystery that science has yet to fully unravel? To even begin to answer, let's take it step by step. Because for this ladder to make sense, for order to arise from chance, we must understand the secret ingredient, the most powerful concept of all, time. George Wald, whom we mentioned at the beginning, wrote in an article titled The Origin of Life, another beautiful idea, time is in fact the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One has only to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. Our mortal minds cannot truly grasp the full meaning of that sentence. Allow me to rephrase it another way. If we place an infinite number of monkeys randomly typing on infinite typewriters, one of them will eventually write Hamlet, with probability 1. Although this idea may sound like a childish joke, it is actually a mathematical theorem that invites reflection on the relationship between randomness and order, and how, even in completely random processes given infinite time, highly ordered structures can emerge, like producing an exact copy of Hamlet, letter by letter, word by word, paragraph by paragraph. Of course, this takes nothing away from Shakespeare, the Bard of Avon, quite the opposite. After all, he didn't have an army of infinite monkeys typing at random. So what happens in practice? If a monkey types randomly, the odds of it producing a coherent sentence are astronomically small. In fact, in 2003, a group of British researchers tested a version of this idea using 6 monkeys and a computer. Instead of writing Hamlet, the monkeys mostly typed the letter S and used the keyboard as a toilet, which confirms that monkeys and typewriters aren't enough. Infinity is required for the idea to actually work. The Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges revisited and popularized this concept in his 1941 short story, The Library of Babel, where he imagined an infinite library containing every possible book formed by all conceivable combinations of letters. Borges doesn't mention monkeys, but the idea is the same. Every conceivable and nonsensical text exists in that library, including the transcript of this very video. As human beings, bound by our own mortality to a few decades of life, we are used to thinking in terms of minutes, hours, months, years, even centuries and millennia. But we struggle to comprehend timescales that are vastly, vastly greater. They are simply ideas that lie completely beyond the scope of our thinking. For our minds, it's as difficult as accepting that the largest number we can imagine is still as far from infinity as the number 1. Let's consider the number pi. If the conjecture that it's a normal number is true, and all evidence suggests it is, it means that any sequence of digits appears with equal frequency. In that case, pi isn't just a number, it's a universe of information. Hidden somewhere in its vast, infinite expansion of decimals lies every combination of numbers you can imagine. Your first love's phone number, your date of birth, your passport number, your card's PIN, or the nuclear launch codes for every superpower. But it goes even further. If we convert those numbers into text, somewhere in that infinite string of numbers lies the full name of every person who has ever lived and ever will live. We would, of course, find several copies of Hamlet, but not just a copy faithful to the original, but infinite variations, some where only a letter or a word is changed. Another where Ophelia doesn't tragically drown, and perhaps a version where instead of his famous soliloquy, Hamlet recites something like, "To subscribe or not to subscribe, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to like this video, to click the bell, perchance to be notified." Ah, there's the dilemma. The decimals of pi wouldn't just contain Hamlet, but all the books from Borges's infinite library. Although, obviously, the vast majority would be nothing but meaningless, incoherent noise. But amidst all that chaos, inevitably you would also find all the books that have ever been written, those that are yet to be written, and those that will never be written at all. And even more, encoded in those digits, you would find every image you've ever seen, every melody you've ever heard, your favorite song, the DNA of every living being, and, perhaps, even the answers to the great questions of the cosmos. All possible information contained within the simple ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. Only when we grasp the true meaning of this paradox, this vertigo of the infinite, can we begin to understand the level of complexity that emergent properties can reach in a system, born from simple initial rules over the course of billions of years. In a large enough time frame, randomness holds the seat of order, and information ceases to be special or magical. It becomes statistically inevitable. And this is not just an abstract mathematical idea. Isn't this exactly what we've seen happen, albeit on a finite but immensely vast timescale, with evolution by natural selection on our own planet? Over millions of years, chance introduces a change, an error when duplicating the genetic instructions. Most of these mutations, like the absurd copies of Hamlet, will be a senseless jumble and even harmful to the next generation. But every now and then, very rarely, one of those mutations ends up improving the original hereditary instructions, resulting in an evolutionary advantage like color vision or the ability to fly. That improvement, that new quality, that evolutionary advantage is an emergent property not accounted for in the original instructions, and one that arose by chance over millions of years. But the ladder of emergence doesn't stop with us. What happens when we, intelligent beings who call ourselves Homo sapiens, begin to build a new kind of mind? Not from carbon, but from silicon. What happens when we create artificial neural networks that emulate our own brains, but operate with the logic of ones and zeros, and then scale them up to a colossal level? It's no longer a hypothesis. It's a reality. Emergent properties have appeared in artificial intelligence models that have surprised, puzzled, and even amazed their own creators. In a neural network, especially in transformers, the rules are incredibly simple. Mathematical operations, multiplying matrices, adding numbers, and applying functions that determine which words are more important in a sentence. The architecture, the set of rules, was designed. They were given a goal, to predict the next word. And then they were fed an almost inconceivable amount of data, a large part of all digitized human knowledge. And then, when the models reached a colossal scale, with billions of parameters and trained on trillions of words, emergence appeared once again, unexpectedly. One of the first emergent abilities was something called in-context learning. If we told the model, cow is yes, car is no, chicken is yes, and then asked about pig, it wouldn't search a database. It reasoned that a pig is more like a cow than a car, and answered yes. It inferred the pattern without anyone explaining the rules. Another surprising ability was step-by-step reasoning. In 2022, researchers at Google discovered that if they gave a model that failed at complex problems the simple instruction, think step by step, its success rate skyrocketed. The model learned to reason out loud, breaking down the problem and arriving at the correct solution. No one taught it to do that. Then came something even stranger, zero-shot translation. An AI trained to translate from English to French and from English to Chinese suddenly could translate directly from French to Chinese, even though it had never seen that language pair. This suggests it wasn't just translating words, but had built some internal representation of meaning. And in some cases, it went even deeper, building internal models of the world. When training an AI to play Othello just by showing it moves, scientists discovered that, in order to predict the next move, the AI had built an internal representation of the board. It didn't memorize sequences, it inferred the rules of the game. But perhaps the most astonishing emergent property is functional code generation. Trained to predict the next token, the expectation was that it could complete lines of code. What emerged was the ability to write entire functional programs from scratch, debug them, explain what they do, and even translate code from one language to another. This goes beyond imitation. It's an emergent understanding of logic, syntax, and structure. Reasoning, translation, internal models, all of that is fascinating. But functional code generation is the acid test. Code isn't subjective. It either works or it doesn't. The fact that an AI can generate something with strict internal logic that produces a working result may be the most compelling demonstration of emergent understanding, far beyond being mere stochastic parrots. The great lesson of modern AI is the same as that of Conway's game of life. Scaling up massively doesn't just give us a slightly better version of what we had. Qualitatively new and surprising capabilities emerge, ones that were never explicitly designed. Scientists are no longer just engineers building machines piece by piece. They become gardeners. The seed is the architecture. The fertile soil is the data. and they watch in awe at what kind of wondrous plant emerges. And then an inevitable question arises. If these artificial minds already show such clear emergent properties, isn't it logical to think that if we keep scaling, we might reach true artificial general intelligence, AGI, maybe even artificial superintelligence, ASI, and, perhaps, even consciousness? We've reached the end of our journey. We're gazing at our own image reflected in the mirror of AI. Here, the answer, whatever it may be, is equally profound for us. Even if the final answer is no, if scale alone could never spark that flame, that, in itself, would still be an invaluable lesson. That our own consciousness is far more complex than we imagined and may require different rules, other principles we have yet to understand. That in order to replicate it in artificial intelligence, we may still be missing new algorithms yet to be discovered. But if the answer is yes, if scale and complexity truly are the way, that would give new meaning to our existence. We would be witnessing in real time the mystery of our own intelligence and consciousness unfolding before our eyes as we see ourselves reflected in that mirror of silicon. Either way, whether yes or no, the journey itself teaches us something profound about ourselves, about the depths of consciousness, the nature of intelligence, and our place in the cosmos. We still don't know the answer to that question. Still, the possibilities already feel very, very real. And if it were to happen, it would give our existence a whole new meaning. Intelligence and consciousness would no longer be inexplicable miracles or ghosts in the machine. They would become something far greater, a natural consequence of the universe. As if the laws of physics carried within them a cosmic recipe, one that only requires time and the right environment. It would be a powerful sign that intelligence and consciousness are not isolated miracles on a lonely planet, but properties that naturally emerge from the fundamental laws of the universe, ready to arise under common conditions anywhere in the cosmos. We've come a long way, from Conway's game of life, where simple rules create unexpected complexity, to the evolution of the universe itself. We saw that, on immensely large timescales, and from elementary particles and the fundamental laws of physics, increasingly complex systems emerge: chemistry, biology, life, and eventually intelligence. And now, that biological intelligence is giving birth to a new form of intelligence, the artificial kind. We are witnessing in real time how emergence keeps happening again and again as the models grow ever more massive. As we have seen, the concept of emergence is not merely a scientific curiosity, it is the silent, underlying symphony of the universe itself. We see it in the graceful dance of a starling murmuration, where thousands of birds move as a single fluid entity, guided by no leader, but by a simple set of local rules. Stay close, but not too close, and align with your neighbors. From this elementary script, a breathtaking spectacle of coordinated, unpredictable beauty is born. Is it so different, then, to look at our own consciousness? We are, after all, a murmuration of neurons. Billions of individual cells, each following its own simple biochemical rules, firing and connecting in a local dance. And yet, from this microscopic, decentralized chaos, the grandest of all emergences arises, the sense of I, the feeling of love, the sting of regret, the ability to ponder the stars from which we came. Perhaps the universe has only one fundamental trick, and it repeats it on every scale, from the flock of birds to the galaxy, and all the way down to the very core of our own minds. The rule is always the same. The whole can manifest qualities that its individual parts, on their own, do not possess. It is the universe revealing itself to be infinitely greater, more complex, and more wonderful than the mere sum of its parts. Carl Sagan himself echoed George Wald's quote in his own way when he said, "These are some of the things that hydrogen atoms do after 15 billion years of cosmic evolution." And that is one of the most profound and unifying ideas in modern science and philosophy. Because to understand that is to begin to understand ourselves. This isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the next emergence.